Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 325 of the podcast. It's November 26th, 2018. I hope you had a lot to be thankful for last week with the Thanksgiving holiday if you were listening in the United States, and I hope you have a lot to be grateful for anyway, no matter where you live. I'm thankful today to be joined. I've got as my guest Andrea Hardaway. She is a consultant and operational leader. She's the executive director of the Association for Vocal Disorders, a nonprofit organization. Well, and Andrea and I first crossed paths thanks to LinkedIn. I saw what she was sharing there, and vice versa. We were, commenting on each other's posts. Realized that we had a lot of shared views on things. We also had a chance to visit a hospital together in Florida last year to learn about their lean improvement work. And so, we have enough professional interests in common. I thought it made sense to record a conversation and share it here with the listeners. Andrea has worked in manufacturing, healthcare, and other parts of the service sector, and has seen common themes across industries. And one of those is seeing the opportunity to better utilize metrics in a way that resonates better with staff and is connected to improvement work, something I'm also very interested in, of course. So the title of today's episode is Making Metrics Matter. We're going to talk about all of this and more. If you want to find links to Andrea's profile, she makes a book recommendation toward the end of the podcast, a book called How to Measure Anything. You can find all of that and information about how to subscribe by going to leanblog.org/325. Andrea, hi. Thanks for being a guest on the podcast. How are you?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about metrics and lean and related topics today, but before we get into that, as we usually do here, if you can start off, introducing yourself and a little bit about your career and background.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's funny, I actually started off as an engineer. I was the classic tech head type person and thought that's what my journey was going to be. And then I found myself being really interested in people and service. And I always say if I could do it all over again, I probably would have if I were going to go into engineering, it probably would have been industrial engineering, not necessarily electrical. I just really love people and don't really like being behind the computer quite a lot. But I've got about 15 years of experience with lean, performance management, and operational leadership through a variety of industries: logistics, telecommunications, government and defense contracting, gaming, casual dining. So a lot of different industries, which is the benefit of being laid off, by the way. You get to move from one industry,
yeah,
still see that you can tie these skills together. But I am most recently doing operations consultant work focused on driving excellence within service-based industries. And I have a specific affinity to healthcare. So within healthcare, most of my experience is on the payer or the insurance side, several years experience there. And I've also worked on the hospital side. I helped set up the operational excellence infrastructure with the 7-hospital system. But more than anything, wherever I am within healthcare, I am really laser focused on improving the patient experience through operational and service excellence.
And you have experience through your career with both Lean and Six Sigma.
I do. And I think that's the interesting part of starting off as an engineer. And I've actually got minors in computer science and math. So while in the work world, working for a government and defense contractor, they noticed that I had really good technical skills, but I also had this great ability to influence the team. So I was very privileged to get put into the Lean and Six Sigma training program at Lockheed Martin, which is probably one of the best on that side. And I went through green belt training as well as black belt, did several projects there. And it really changed the direction of my career, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand what you're saying because I graduated from undergrad with a degree in industrial engineering, but it took me a while to get there. I started off in chemical engineering and material science, and I realized I was less interested at looking at the world through a microscope or an electron microscope than I was at stepping back and looking at organizations and systems and people. So I understand that appeal, but it's good that you were able to take your career in a direction that seems to fit with you your interest and personality. Right?
Most definitely. I'm a lot happier now, and I think I really like understanding the language of the business, why we do what we do, and who we serve. And sometimes if you're more in a technical role, you might just focus specifically on that element that you're working on, unless you have the mind to go outside. And typically that happens through lean training, where you develop that behavior and you know to look outside of it. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on shifting from manufacturing, Lockheed Martin, to different service sectors. Is it more important, or what comes to mind if we talk about differences in those different environments, or some of do the common themes related to improving a business stand out?
Yeah, so I can kind of see it from both sides. One of the biggest things that I see is a lot of times when the training comes from the manufacturing side, and then you try to translate that to the service industry, we're still using the word widget. And everywhere I go, I'm like, okay, the almighty widget, here we go. And that works well in manufacturing. We can see it, we can touch it, we can feel it. However, in the service-based industry, a lot of times you're dealing with people and their actual experience. So how do you look at things in that way? So with a widget, this inanimate object, you can see how it changes in form and structure and how it builds. And with the people on the service side, you really have to develop a skill of putting yourself in their shoes, understanding what they're looking for, what might be missing, what they're feeling, and what they need. So it just requires you to look at things from a different perspective. And I think that's sort of the biggest thing. But there are some common themes, right? I mean, turnover time is important, whether you're looking at how long it takes you, turnaround time, whether you're looking at how long it takes you to get a widget through a process or to get a patient in and out of the door. Time is something that's always very important. And I think about like the core measures, right? So on the manufacturing side, we looked at quality. We looked at financial metrics, which would typically be cost. We looked at schedule metrics, and then we looked internal at satisfaction metrics, and that's the internal teams you work with. That translates very well to the service industry. What's the quality of my service? How do I measure that? What are indicators of the quality of my service? Looking at scheduling. Do I deliver what I say I would deliver when I say I would? Looking at the cost of doing that, and then looking at satisfaction internal to the operations as well as to your external customer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I started in the auto industry, the mantra was SQDCM: safety, quality, delivery, which schedule, cost, and morale. And no matter how we frame it, with which letters and which categories, I think those are pretty transferable categories. In healthcare, quality and safety are two sides of the same coin. Are we providing the right treatment, the right way, and without error? That error obviously has a patient safety component. But I'm sure when you're working in the hospital side, and before we dive deeper in the metrics, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the payer side. Mm-hmm. On the hospital side, I'm sure you were hit with this too. Somebody says, well, patients are not cars.
Right.
Okay, so then how to respond or how to continue that conversation? Because I think sometimes people are trying to shut down lean or lessons from manufacturing. Like, well, yeah, you're right. Patients are not cars, but how would you continue that?
Patients are not cars, but they are very much on a journey, just like a vehicle. They are, and we need to make sure they can get where they need to go with the most certainty that they ended up in the right place. And I think that's the best way to look at it. And I love that word journey when you think about the patient, because if you look at it, every patient has a name, and every name is tied to a person, and every person has a story. So their story begins well before they enter the hospital or the medical office. There are influencing factors that brought them into the door. Those factors are a part of their journey. Those factors are a part of the reason they come in agitated or come in just complacent or however they come in. And we in a service-based industry have to be prepared to deal with that patient in that way. So you mentioned quality. So clinical quality certainly important from a number of different angles, but also it's the quality of service. And when you think about that, you think about empathy, right? How do I have empathy with the patient? And that's not always something that can be easily taught. It's not just a formula. If the patient comes in mad, do this. If they come in sad, do that. It's not that. So what we actually have to teach is, how do I put myself in this person's shoes? What may be going on? How do I put myself aside, because I'm still a part of their story, but they're still the star? How do I put myself aside and help them in their journey?
Yeah, and I think one of the key differences, in manufacturing, the products, the components don't have feelings and emotion. If a part is delayed from the supplier, the part's not grumbling about it. But in service industries, and I imagine the same would be true in restaurants or on the payer side, if someone's calling with a complaint or a question about their insurance, there's the elements of service quality and the emotion that enter into the experience. That's I think a different equation. The customer is not this kind of generalized, vague, off in another place person or organization. The customer is right there
Right.
in front of you, right?
Right. And you know what? And when I think about it from the payer side, right? So we talked about how their journey starts well before they walk into the door of a facility. Their journey continues when they leave the facility. And one of the things and we talked about, how do we translate from manufacturing to service? Well, when I worked in the government and defense contracting industry, one of the things that we would always say is, do your job as if someone's life depends on it, because it does. Because we were developing equipment for our soldiers out in the field. Well, in healthcare, that couldn't be more true. Do your job as if someone's life depends on it, because it does. And that's the same on the payer side, right? We need to pay these claims in a timely way. We need to make sure that we pay them accurately. The physicians do not need to be caught up on the administrative side of sending in documents and reprocessing and all of that. We need to free up their time to focus on the value, which is the patient. I would hate to think that a cancer patient is sitting at home with stage 4 cancer, uncertain of whether or not they can have their next treatment because we may have processed some payment wrong with the insurance company. And guess what? Those stresses happen. They propagate in the families. The payer side is very confusing and complex, so they don't understand all of that. All they know is, either you're going to pay for this treatment or you're not. And if they feel like you're not, then that creates stress, which then becomes a cycle, a part of their journey. They become more sick from the stress. So even the payer side is very important on the patient journey.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm just going to, since I've never worked on the payer side and you have, I'm just going to throw a scenario at you just because this happened recently. I had a stomach bug, ended up dehydrated in the emergency room. And so, I've got insurance and there were co-pays and things I had to pay on the spot. But the other day I got 3 separate bills because they ended up taking a chest x-ray, and I don't know, I assume that was medically necessary. In their judgment it was. But I got a bill for labs for $3.45. I got a bill from the radiology group for like $5.20. And then there was a third bill for $7. I thought, is it really cost effective to send out bills that are that small?
It is not. From a patient's perspective, it's extremely stressful. First of all, I had an eye surgery, not to take away from your stomach bug, but I had a little eye surgery, and I was told that the procedure would cost me, after my insurance and everything, the procedure would cost me about $700 out of pocket. Fine. I was prepared to pay the $700 out of pocket. That's what the doctor's office worked with me on. What they didn't tell me is that the anesthesiologist was out of network, and that would cost me an additional like $3,000 or something crazy. Now, to them, it wasn't their job, right? They schedule with their physician. The surgical facility brings in the anesthesiologist, all of this. But what you just identified is a huge gap in the healthcare industry, and it is a significant thing that could be improved and drive improvement throughout the healthcare ecosystem. I mean, that is not necessary at all. And then think about the poor person in the surgical center or in the emergency room or wherever you are, who has to process all of these things and then manage this billing. is a headache. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I mean, I looked at it as more of, I mean, I just kind of laughed. It was kind of an irritation. Like the process person in me says, fine, I'll go to 3 different websites and type, click, and my credit card is stored in the browser. And all right, it's not that much work. I can pay the bill without, I don't care about the 50-cent stamp. But I was just thinking of like how, I know it costs them more to process and receive the bill than it was worth. So I wonder, why do they not just write off small amounts like that? But I was thankful to not get hit by the out-of-network surprise that you described, because I've seen more and more news stories about this, and this is a huge financial surprise, and it's a stress that I think people are trying to figure out how can we prevent that? And I don't think it's fair to put it on a patient who might be sick or injured or in no position to say, okay, wait a minute, timeout, are you in network?
Exactly.
That's just not appropriate.
Exactly. It shouldn't be their job, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't be their job. And the worst thing is when you think you get these 3 bills, they look like they're for the same thing. So you pay the highest one thinking you're taken care of. Some people will do that. And then you have $1.25 going to a collections agency. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense.
So there's a lot of, as always, there are many opportunities for improvement in this system. But but let's go ahead and dive into the main topic here. Metrics in the workplace. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it's not that having metrics in and of itself fixes anything, but it's a necessary part of the equation, right? So can you share some of your perspectives on why this is an important topic?
Oh, definitely. And I will tell you that my first experience, every job I had, they measured things, and I was just like, okay, we measure things, and I didn't really understand how it tied to me specifically. When I did go through that Lean and Six Sigma training, I was also put in a role of a performance management lead for several different divisions within the company. And again, this was the government and defense contracting industry. And I had the opportunity to see performance management done right. And it was amazing to see how data actually drives business decisions. And it's not just, and when I say data, I'm not just talking about a data point. I'm talking about using data to tell the story of what is actually happening in the process, and then being able to tie that to the actual business needs. And this is especially important in publicly traded companies, where individuals who have a vested interest in the company actually see that they have the power to influence the value of that organization. So very interested in metrics from that standpoint. And just from a performance management standpoint, not only was I developing metrics within this organization, and I hate to say I'll say I led the development of these metrics, but it was really the team, right? They had to have ownership. They knew sometimes in layman's terms what they needed to do. They knew what they needed to deliver, but they didn't know how to translate that to numbers-based information that mattered. So just going through that process of developing the metrics and some of the categories that you and I spoke about earlier, the cost, the quality, the schedule, developing that story, and then seeing the lights glow in the eyes of the team members, seeing them get excited and passionate and take ownership of what they do, because they truly understand how it impacts their customer, how it impacts the business.
Yeah, so we'll come back and talk more about those ideas of connections between metrics and the work and the improvement at that individual level. I like what you said about the idea of data, and you added, not just a data point. So, when we talk about, people use the phrase data-driven decision-making or data-driven management. There's somebody I was talking to a year or two ago, and they joked, yeah, but we need to move beyond single data point driven. We look at data in the more collective sense in terms of what trends are we seeing in our metrics. And like you said, that this is one thing I emphasized in my book here. It's not necessarily the story we want to tell. It's the story, the honest story that the metrics and the process are telling us, right? And trying to reflect that.
Yes, indeed. And I'll tell you, I really am enjoying your book, by the way. I think I mentioned that to you. And one reason is because we had a chance to talk when we first met a couple of years ago in Orlando, and we talked about this similar thing. And then, to see it in your book, and it really does matter. And so often, and this happens a lot in leadership will respond to just one data point. There's one thing that looks awry, and we're putting action committees in place and root cause analysis and all of this, when we are, and they typically say in the Six Sigma world, you're responding to special cause variation as though it's common cause. And that's what happens all the time when you just look at one data point. But let's think about it in terms of morale. We talked about earlier. What does that do to a team? It tells that team, hey, you cannot make any mistakes ever. As a matter of fact, you're not human. Just think of yourself as a widget or a machine, because you can't go out of bounds at all. But going out of bounds is what humans do, and it's what drives continuous improvement. So I think it is very important to make sure that we see the story of that process. And I will add too, yes, it is a series of data points over time, but sometimes it is looking at metrics in tandem and in partnership with one another to tell the story. So if you are a leader, and I'll just throw this out to anyone who's listening, if you're a leader and you're newer to using data to measure and manage your organization, work with your team to understand how that data point could have been influenced from within your organization or from outside of your organization. And then use that information to determine if you are even indeed measuring the right things to begin with.
Yeah, and so there's two important questions. Are you measuring the right things? And then how are you looking at the metrics you've decided? And there's other people who've written books around what to measure. I think of Pascal Dennis and his book, Getting the Right Things Done, about lean and strategy deployment. And there are other books about that. But I think when we start looking at the reactions and the decisions to what's actually happening, I think one other aspect I think there's two aspects of morale. One is, I think, as you said, if a metric is not allowed to ever go out of bounds, then people will do all sorts of dysfunctional things to make the metric look right when the underlying system is not better. We've seen that with Wells Fargo, when there was this mandate of, 8 is great. Every customer needs to have 8 accounts. And so people started, employees and branch managers put employees under pressure. Well, you got to hit that target no matter what. Well, the no matter what, unfortunately, included opening accounts without customers' permission and saddling them with fees. And so I think that, there's an important point there about, looking at, if the story is we're not performing where we need to improve, where we need to be, how do we drive improvement instead of just getting upset and pressuring people, right?
Right. And I've got another example too that ties to that. So we talk about the service industry, and one place that this happens in all industries, if you ever have like a help desk or anywhere where they respond to support tickets. I was working with an organization, and the goal was, we didn't want to have any tickets over 30 days. And our goal was really to solve all tickets within 7 days, right? So all tickets need to be solved within 7 days, and we don't want to have any tickets over 30 days. And this was just the mandate. Well, that works if all tickets are created equally. Unfortunately, that drove the behavior where team members were cherry picking the tickets, right? So they're solving the easiest ones and avoiding the critical ones because they didn't want their name to be tied to something that took longer than 7 days.
Yeah.
And then when it started getting to 30 days, one of two things would happen. Either they would quickly fix a critical issue, causing errors, which would cause the generation of another ticket. Now that wasn't being tracked, right? We closed the one. We're not tracking the rework and the repeat business. Or they would simply assign the ticket to another department to start the clock over. So you are exactly right about metrics and what we measure, how we communicate about those things, driving behavior. And it's real. And you say, well, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do I look at the behavior that I want and then create the metric, or do I create the metric and watch the behavior? I think it's a mixture of both. And I think it is a continual process. I think anytime you put a new metric in place, you need to watch the behavior. You need to on the floor talking with the people who influence this measure, and you need to allow people to be honest, and you need to reward that honesty.
So I was saying a friend of mine who is doing some consulting work with one of these city bike share programs. Mm-hmm. And so one of their core activities is repairing the bikes. And so the people doing the repair have certain targets for, you need to fix X number of bikes per day. But to your point exactly, not all bike repair is the same. So you can cherry pick the easy ones.
Yep.
And maybe the goal is to get more bikes out into service. So maybe that isn't the most dysfunctional thing, but I think that's a judgment, I guess, to your point about you need to look and see what's the impact of the metric, or do we need some sort of counterbalancing metric to try to prevent dysfunction, right?
Exactly. Totally agree with that.
The other thing I was going to touch on when it comes to morale is, I think there are times where you see a metric where it's fluctuating. And I was talking to someone the other day who had a scenario where the organization only posted the last 4 data points, which is, to me, is a very limited set of data. It's better than 1 or 2 data points. But, they had a situation where the metric had been green, and now it became red. Well, then, like what you were describing a couple of minutes ago, the reaction, the hand wringing, the root cause questions, the action team, where nothing changed. The same system that generated the green metric is occasionally, if performance is kind of near the target, sometimes it's going to go red. That doesn't mean something went wrong. And this overreaction can get in the way of stepping back and asking, how do we really improve performance, right?
Yep. And think about like red, yellow, green. It always cracks me up sometimes, right? I mean, a lot of times organizations assign red, yellow, or green status based on gut. It's really nothing real. It's whoever's in charge that day. I'm going to determine whether we're red, yellow, and green. You don't see that as much on the manufacturing side, right? Because you're collecting a lot of data and it's in lockstep, and if things are out of spec. But on the service side, you do see that quite a bit. Are we red? Are we yellow? Are we green? And there's one person assigning it. Well, newsflash, in the service industry, the team knows, right? They don't know if they're red or yellow or green, but they know if they're doing well, if they're not, if they have an opportunity to do better, because in a service-based industry, they are getting real-time feedback all the time from the people they are interacting with. But it is, quite interesting how we do that. And I say that to say, sometimes overreaction happens when a metric has gone red, but we actually don't have clear, accurate, valid, or valuable limits identified to really prove that we're truly red. We say we're red because we're different from where we were before, and it looks like a big gap. But if we're still well within specs and well within a reasonable delivery, then we're still green, or we at worst we're yellow.
Yeah. Well, so there's maybe, I'll add, there's another question. So there's the question of what should we measure? There's a question of how do we react? I think maybe tied into the reaction is how should we set goals or targets? If an organization has hit a target at 84.7%, like how much debate and argument went into whether that should have been 84.7 or 85? If someone said like, whoa, no, don't say, I don't think I can hit 85. I mean, you get that kind of silliness too, right?
You get that silliness. You also get silliness where there are no goals and there are no limits. There's just data, and I know you've seen it tons and tons of time. And that's one of the first things that I look at when I see a measure. I'm like, okay, how do we know if we're doing well or not? Yeah. What are we aiming for? But like, it's funny you talk about like that 84.7 or whatever. Sometimes that's just thrown out from wherever it comes from. But the way I think about goals, like what makes a really good goal and drives the behavior that you want on a team is not just for that goal to be achievable, but for it to be a developing goal. So if I know by the end of the year I need to be performing at 90%, then what's stopping me from doing a baseline now? If I'm at 50%, it won't necessarily encourage my team if I show every month you are at 50 cents, you need to be at 50%, you need to be at 90%. What will encourage them is if I stair step that goal and I say within 2 months, let's be at 60%. within 3 months, let's be at 80%. You know, if you do it in that way so that they can go along with the journey to delivery. Now, that doesn't mean that 50% is acceptable. That doesn't mean that them achieving that lower target is acceptable. But what it does mean is that it is realistic in this human-based business, and it inspires them to want to do more.
Mm-hmm. So, and a lot of that, I'm sure, has to do with the leadership and the communication. You know, if you're helping a team go through a kind of stair-step approach, I imagine you're communicating or setting expectations to where, let's say if you set that goal as 60 and now they hit that, and now you raise the bar to 75, they might say, well, Andrea, come on, we hit our target. And now you're dangling the carrot a little further out in front of us, or whatever analogy you want to use. How do you manage that those situations?
I learned a very good way for me to manage that when I was working in that government and defense contracting industry. So again, something to translate over to the service-based industry, and it is actually getting the team to challenge themselves. So getting the team to understand how their actions drive performance. And we as people are inherently competitive. We are. I mean, it is in us to be competitive. Some people have it a little worse than others, but we want to feel that sense of accomplishment. So if you meet with the team on a regular basis, you ensure they understand the measure, you tie this measure into the day-to-day operations, you make it a part of their job to know what that information is, to know where we are today. And when I say today, I should be able to go to anyone on the floor and say, hey, how are we performing today? And they should know, because it is a part of their life. And if it is a part of their life and they have that sense of competitiveness as an individual and as a team, when they start approaching that stair-step goal, they're going to be looking to challenge themselves because they still have their eye on the long-term goal. And they know that they have to keep working to get there. So the trick is for me as a leader, not to challenge them, but for me to partner with the team and encourage them to challenge themselves.
So can you talk about that more, or use an example of how that played out? I'm really intrigued by the idea of, you know, drawing out motivation, and instead of, I hear a lot of times people say, in Lean, there's this progression where we say, okay, we've learned not to tell people what to do. Mm-hmm. We want to draw out their ideas, and the team generally knows best, and the leader can be more collaborative than command and control. And then, I hear it sometimes say, well, okay, yeah, we need to tell people why improvement is important. And I wonder, sometimes, if that's really as effective as what I hear you saying, drawing out motivations or goals. So does this come to the question of, is it just open-ended questions to the team, or how do you balance their motivation, which is powerful and necessary, with business goals and objectives that also need to be met?
The biggest thing is being present. So a lot of times we as leaders or facilitators or internal consultants, we treat the team as though it's, you guys are your own operation and you're sort of answering to me, or I'm going to check in every now and then and see how you're doing because I've got other people to talk to, other places to go. I need to speak to your performance, so you have to do well. But when you are actually able to embed yourself in that team, when you're able to build trust, when you ask questions, open-ended questions, like you said, that challenge them to think and to be creative, this is when you're able to identify the people in the team that actually influence other team members. Yeah. So when you identify those influencers, then you can essentially, I hate to use the word leverage, but you can partner with them to influence the other team members as well. And I think just being present is so important, because the other thing that does is build trust. And it builds enough trust in the team to know that they can make a mistake, but you all are in this together. So they then want to see you do well. They want to put you in a situation where you have a good news story to tell the people that you report to. Why? Because now you are one of them. You are a part of their team. You have proven that you have a vested interest. The influencers are speaking on your behalf. They're seeing that they can perform because they met that stair-step target. They want to do better. They want to be that good news story.
Yeah. Well, and a great leader creates an environment where people choose to follow them, when there's that level of commitment and collaboration. Toyota people really, really emphasize the idea of mutual trust and respect.
Yes.
And if that's not already, if that's not part of the fabric of the organization, you mentioned the idea of building trust. What are some thoughts or examples or a story of you or another leader that you were working with, taking action to build trust? Does somebody have to first recognize, oh gosh, as painful as it might be, to recognize that there isn't enough trust?
I actually go into situations assuming that I'm not trusted. And I do that because I haven't done anything to deserve it or to earn it. And as well-intended as I may be, as, bubbly and energetic and influential as I may be in my words, that won't necessarily drive the behavior that I need. So just giving an example for me. So I started a new assignment a couple of months ago, and I'm working as an executive in a publicly health traded company. Well, I've got this big organization, this, as far as on the org chart, they are under me and reporting into me, but I am very cognizant of the language I use with my team. So I always use the word partnership, and instead of saying those that report to me, I say those who I work with, and that language really matters. I never try to be the expert in something that I'm not the expert in. I love elevating experts. I love asking questions. I actually don't mind looking dumb. And I will say that. I will say, you know what? I just don't know. I'm going to ask some questions. If I look dumb, that's fine. But at the end of this conversation, we're both going to be better for it.
Yeah.
So, for me, I've been about 2 months in this position, and it is really starting, the trust is really starting to ferment now. And I could tell, right? Because now they're coming to me with their problems. They're coming to me with solutions for their problems, and they're looking for thought partnership in that. Whereas before it was transactional, right? I'm asking a question, they're giving an answer. They're asking a question, I'm giving an answer. But now it is thought partnership and wanting feedback on that. And a very specific example, I try not to talk too long and rattle on, but I did want to.
No, it's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to give you a specific example. So there's a very highly visible, fast-paced project that's going on within the organization right now. And there's a specific team within my department that is responsible for a critical piece of that process. And the manager was really overwhelmed, and I could tell the team was doing their best to catch up, but they were so busy trying to catch up that there was no time to really improve from their perspective, right? There was no time. So instead of me just telling them what they should do, how they could do it differently, I decided to get my hands dirty. So I was able to delegate some of the other things that I'm focused on. And I have worked very closely with that team. And I mean, things that I normally, wouldn't do when you have a large organization. I am getting in, actually looking at their data. I have worked with them to redesign their dashboard to tell a story. We have looked at putting some indicators of success in place so that we can reward individuals in the team. Even in the midst of the storm, the team needs some sunshine. So we're finding those places where we can show sunshine. And now I'm starting to get great feedback from that team. Thank you so much. We didn't even know that we had the data to answer these questions. We didn't know that we could be brought out of that fire. We just didn't know. Thank you for getting your hands dirty with us.
Yeah. So getting your hands dirty, having, I think it requires a lot of strength to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And hopefully the team responds to that. Like, depending on who their previous leaders were, that might be a bit of a shock to their system to hear a leader say, I don't know, right? But I mean, I think that does build trust in relationships when there's that honesty of knowing what you don't know and working to get answers or working to get help, even if you can't provide it, or better yet, maybe try to draw answers out of the team. Because
Yes.
sometimes they may be very conditioned and in the habit of asking the boss, because that takes, in a way, I can see where employees get comfortable with that because it takes the burden off them.
Mm-hmm.
The boss has an answer and the boss is wrong. I'm like, well,
It's
the
their
boss's fault, right?
Definitely. And I think we as leaders, it is our responsibility. And I use the word thought partnership because a mentor of mine used that word and it really made a lot of sense. And when things come to me as a leader, I think it is my job to partner with the person who's bringing it to me to be creative in solving the problem. And when I share this concept with some people, they say, well, you know what, just do the work. That just takes too much time. It takes too much time. But my thinking is if I'm able to make the investment up front, then we save in the long run, because now these issues, the moment something looks like it's going to become an issue, the team is brave enough to recognize it and we know how to discuss it so that it doesn't become critical. You know, I look at operations and service and people ask me, you know, what are some indicators that things are running smoothly? And for me, indicators are number one is issues are invisible to your customer. They have no reason to know. If they feel like things went smoothly without a hitch, even if things were torn up behind the wall, then you're doing something right as a leader. If your customer has to know every single functional area or department in your organization, you're doing something wrong. Customers don't do business with departments and org structures. They do business with systems. So if we can develop a culture where that sort of thing is invisible to the customer, right? And I don't mean because we just throw up walls and we kind of fake it until we make it. I mean because we are able to solve problems quickly and still deliver on expectations, then we know we're doing something right. And we can only do that if we identify issues before they make it down the line to the customer.
Yeah. And identifying issues and having that honesty to raise the flag instead of covering up the problem and hoping it either doesn't get discovered later or it becomes someone else's problem.
Oh yeah. And I don't know why I had this thought, but when you look at metrics in that process, a lot of times we evaluate processes and we can say, oh, we didn't measure this, we need to add this, or we're not tracking this, we need to add that. At the same time, there are some things we probably don't need to track as closely. So, and you see it a lot in organizations, right? A lot of adding, but we never stop doing some things that we're doing. We never scale back. So there could be metrics that we are tracking on a daily basis, every single day, and we're putting effort in those daily. But once we have it down packed, maybe we should only be looking at it every 2 weeks, and we should spend our time focusing on something else.
And you mentioned indicators, and one of the other topics we were going to talk about here today, I think it's a really interesting topic. You know, indicators that a metric or metrics are actually resonating with a team or a department. So, you know, it's just a second ago, you were talking about the idea of feedback loops and adjustment of, you know, how often do we measure. I guess part of that feedback loop is gauging that level of resonance. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so for me to understand if a metric is resonating or not, then, and I'm sort of a people person, but one thing I pay attention to is the visceral response the team and individuals have to fluctuations in performance, right? So if we start to drop low or if we drive high, is there a visceral response that occurs? Meaning, are they automatically trying to do better? Are they talking about it amongst themselves? Or does it take us having a meeting and pointing it out before we start driving change? If it requires us to have a meeting and requires that one person who updates the chart to communicate it to the team, then it's probably not resonating as well as it should. So what we measure should become a fiber of how we operate. And it becomes a fiber when you have that visceral reaction, because when something's torn, we all feel it. When something heals, we all know it. And so I look for that. I look for indicators of that, right? Like I said, do I have to have a meeting? Blah, blah, blah. The other thing is, are they monitoring it without being prompted to, right? So sometimes we have things that we're measuring week over week over week over week, and things may start to trend downward. So do I have individuals on the team who are willing to step up as leaders and say, you know what, just for my sanity, I'm going to look at this every day. for the next week or two. So what sort of ownership are they taking, and are they being accountable for that performance, good or bad? And then, like we said earlier, are they actually challenging themselves to do better? And that's how you know if that metric is really resonating or not.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the last thing you would want to see is a metric being updated and there's indications that performance is not where it needs to be, and people just walk by the board and either don't look at it, or maybe they walk by and look at the board and sigh, or I guess that could mean, and I want to hear your thoughts here. I don't know if this is different ways it resonates. It could be that people don't understand the metric. It could be maybe that they don't understand how their work or their ability to improve the work can affect the metric, right? Or what types of disconnects do you most often see?
Yeah, and it is really those things that you're saying. You know, they don't feel like it applies to them. They feel like they're able to go under the radar. The metric is not in a language that they understand. And to be honest, let's talk about language. Sometimes it's not even what you're measuring, it's the units of measure. You know, if we have a structure where we measure things hour by hour, and then we're reporting things month by month or second by second, or in some weird unit, you know, every seventh day or something, then the team may not understand that because they function on an hourly basis. So they're looking for something to be normalized from an hourly standpoint so that they can see, well, how well do we do in the morning hours, in the early afternoon, you know, in the late evening, on third shift? How well are we doing? So we do have to make sure that they understand how their job influences that metric, and that it is in a language they understand. One of the things I really love to do, you know, sometimes we go into meetings and we have the same person reporting on the same thing, you know, every single time. Oh, okay, you know, Karen, tell us how we're doing with quality, or, you know, Jim, how are we doing with turnaround time on unit 1, or whatever it is. But what I like to do is pass the buck. I like to give others a chance to talk about the metric and to present how it's performing to the team. And this is not an exercise in embarrassing people. It is an exercise in identifying where we may be gapped and helping others understand. And it's also an exercise in developing leaders within the team.
And developing leaders, I mean, I'll just bring it back to Toyota because, you know, I was recently in Japan and was there with some former Toyota leaders from Kentucky and one from Australia. And they put such a focus on developing leaders, developing team members. And I get caught in the trap sometimes where I start thinking the goal is improvement, where I think they're always looking at two sides of the coin. You get improvement through developing people. And I would look and say, well, I'm engaging people. But engaging people, I mean, there's a difference in language there, right? Engaging versus developing. I think developing, to Toyota's credit, is a deeper, more powerful commitment. You know, if you look at their metrics boards, you know, I saw this in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago. What a lot of organizations might call huddle boards, team boards, performance board, performance center. They call it the FMDS, the Floor Management Development System. And like, that's a very powerful, intentional choice of words to it's not just tracking results and tracking what we're doing and seeing the impact on results, but that focus on developing people, I think goes beyond just, it's more than a superficial label for them, it seems.
You used the key word there, and the word you used was intentional. And development really is intentional. You know, I actually think everyone has the ability to develop and grow in some sort of capacity. And leadership is not a role, right? I think leadership is the position you play within your group of peers. I think that's really what it is. And I think you can have people who lead in, you know, one thing, but not another. You know, there are people who lead across the board. There are all sorts of leaders and influencers. And I think our job as actual named leaders or consultants or whoever we are, our job is to help strengthen that within the teams, right? Our job is to help identify it and strengthen it, and to understand that every single person every single person has the capacity to develop. I don't care if it's Jim Roberts, who's been in the same role for 30 years and he just seems happy and he's waiting for retirement, or if it's Linda Sue, who's been there for 7 days and has broken everything she's touched. Every single person has the ability to develop. And when you enter with that belief, you become intentional in identifying ways to develop these people at an individual level that has a goal. And the goal then would be delivery and improvement.
Well said. Well, good point there. I'm going to come back. One other thing, kind of put you on the spot, because you talk about development and everyone can be developed. Earlier, you mentioned mentors. So I was wondering, and I'm thinking back, boy, this would be an interesting question to ask almost any guest. Who are some of the key mentors for you? Whether you don't have to call them out by name necessarily, but I'd be curious to hear some of your reflections on someone who took the effort into mentoring and helping develop you.
Oh, definitely. And I've had a few. I'll talk about one or two just as time permits. So there's one particular person. He was a manager for me at an organization I was with. So my team was really struggling. We had a manager who was just not the strongest leader at that time. And I think he's actually a strong person. He was just misaligned in his role. And he was managing a team of new hires. And we were really struggling. That manager ended up getting reassigned, and another manager adopted us into his team. I really paid attention with how he assimilated us into the team. I focused a lot on that because he had to build us up as a team and then merge us in with his existing team. So I grew to gain a lot of respect for him. In our one-on-one meetings with him as my manager, I talked with him about his leadership philosophy and, just why he made the decisions that he made. And he was one of the first people to actually identify me as a leader. So he essentially made me his chief of staff so that I could see all the things that he saw. And I began to see, hey, I can do more than being an individual contributor. I can do more than, not really owning something, but just trying to influence it. I can do more. He ended up leaving the organization, and he and I stayed in touch very much so. And it is because of him that I am operating in this executive role that I currently have now. So his influence is directly responsible for helping make some of my dreams come true. And I'm actually living beyond, what my goals were. And it is because of a leader like him who was willing to take the time and share with me why he made the decisions he made, and who was willing to take a chance on me.
Yeah. Well, and that's well said. And I think it's great when someone sees potential in you, especially early stages of a career. I had some people like that. My days at General Motors, where in a lot of ways that was a brutal environment and it was dragging me down, and you wonder trying to find your way in a career. But if we have one or two key people who see potential and help you see it, or help you take some steps to develop that potential, goes a long way. I wonder, sometimes people know they've made an impact, and maybe sometimes they don't even realize they made an impact because maybe they were helping a lot of people, and or they so anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, but I had an opportunity to thank one of my mentors about a year ago. It was my favorite teacher from high school, who's now retired. He's a history teacher. I took classes with him 6 out of the 8 semesters of high school. And, I had a chance, somebody had run into him, and anyway, we had a phone call, and I just wanted to thank him. He had lots and lots of students, and I don't know if you even remember me. I think he did, or at least he pretended. Being able to thank someone who's had an influence is a good opportunity when you get the chance.
Yeah, I agree. It really matters. And it's interesting, we talked about like patient journeys and customer journeys, and, we have our own career and development journeys. And I had the opportunity, and this is a little sidetrack, but just to give you a little more about me, through Facebook, I was able to reconnect with one of my teachers from high school. And one thing a lot of people don't know about me is I actually have a learning deficit, and it is with reading. So I have a lot of difficulty with reading comprehension, and I always struggle with that. And while my, measured IQ was really high, I would not always do well on tests, especially if it involved reading. So history, English, that sort of thing. My brain just did not work like that. And this teacher was the first one to really identify what was going on with me. And he taught me strategies to help in my reading, and also to help with my test taking. I can remember one time I went to his class, it was history, and I was really nervous because I knew my brain was going to lock up. And he said, how do you study when you're at home? I said, well, I lay on the floor in my bedroom with the book, and I kind of just draw pictures and to make the story make sense to me. And that's how it has to work. And this man, during the test, pulls me out, takes me to the back of the room, sets a bunch of desks in the back to siphon off a corner for myself, and tells me, lay on the floor. Just act like you're at home. Here's some paper to draw pictures. Take as much time as you need on this test. I'll go talk with your next teacher and let her know you'll be there when you get there. My grades went up in history because of him. He really changed my life. I made it through college because of him. And now, of course, audiobooks are my best friend, but I just going back to tell someone thank you, it really does something to your heart, and I'm pretty sure it does something to theirs as well. Yeah.
Well, and it's awesome to hear your stories of people that have had an impact on you that way. It's really nice thing to hear. And as you discovered through, I could not have gotten through electrical engineering school. My dad and my father-in-law are both electrical engineers, and that's a different kind of smart and a different talent there, right? So we all have our own talents and gifts to tap into. I'm glad you've discovered a path to lean and performance improvement, or whatever label we're going to put to it. Like you said, it's about people. If you do this work, you better be interested in people.
You got that right.
Do you have any final thoughts here as we wrap up, or are there other kind of key points or advice or best practices related to metrics, improvement, leadership that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I think I would say, data is important, but if you're focusing on it to the point where you're just so stressed out and you don't know if you're measuring the right things or not, you're probably working in a silo, and you should engage the team because they typically know what needs to be measured. They typically know where the hot spots are. If you're having trouble on coming up with an actual way to translate that measure, there's a great book that I recommend, and I don't have the author's name in front of me, but hopefully you can note that when we final this. But the book is called How to Measure Anything, and that is an amazing. Anything that you want to measure, this book can give you some guidance on it, and it'll help you come up with some really creative ways on how to look at data and how to look at the situation and identify what it is that you should measure so that you can in turn manage that and then develop. And I'll just say, for those leaders who are in place now and you may be a bit overwhelmed, you're facing down the barrel of some things that have been in place long before you. I wish to you the courage to step outside of the box. I wish to you the courage to measure the things that others will not measure. And I wish to you the courage to allow your team to be human and make mistakes. So that's my final.
That's a great thought to end things on. I'll put a link to that book in the blog post for the episode. It's the book by Douglas Hubbard.
Yes.
How to Measure Anything. I did a quick Amazon search here. Andrea, as we wrap up, how can people find you online? Is LinkedIn the best place? Is there a website you'd point people to?
Yeah, so right now, LinkedIn is the best place to find me, just Andrea Hardaway. And I know Mark will have that link in the write-up as well. I will have a website coming out at some point next year, but I don't have that quite yet, but I'll be sure to find a way to share that when it does come out. But that's the best way. I love connecting with new people. I love going beyond the timeline. So if you want to talk with me, just reach out and let me know. And I'd definitely be interested in hearing other stories as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Andrea. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for sharing your stories and thoughts and experiences and having a really good conversation here today. I don't know if we can measure how good. I hope you feel good about the conversation. We'll
measure it by my smile.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks again, Andrea.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.